You're listening to another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A deep dive into a classic show whose influence is immeasurable. Your next stop? Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast where I review The Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology series. For archives of all of my episodes, visit anthologypod.com. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod and follow me on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod. And while all of these episodes will always be free, if you'd like to support what I do here, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for exclusive B-roll episodes, TV and book reviews, movie reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and early access to podcast episodes. That runs across all three of the podcasts that I do. In addition to Anthology, I do Obsessive Viewer and Tower Junkies. So again, if you want to throw some support and get a ton of bonus content exclusive to Patreon, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And for context, I'm recording this episode August 8th, and Patreon supporters will have access to it on August... I don't know what day, probably August 11th. So they will have access to this because the next episode is coming out August 11th. They will have access to this on August 14th, and this is going to be going up on August 18th. So a little bit of incentive to sign up for Patreon if you want early access to content. Okay, so that rambling is out of the way now. With that rambling out of the way, I should say. Today on the show, I'm going to be going through my review of The Hunt, which is the 19th episode of The Twilight Zone's third season, and it originally aired on January 26, 1962, and I will, of course, be rounding out the episode with a brief review of Science Fiction Theater Season 1, Episode 26, Target Hurricane. And before that, I just want to say I hope you guys enjoyed my Dead Man's Shoes, Dead Woman's Shoes, and Dead Man's Eyes review last week. I had a lot of fun putting that together, and it was a lot of fun to get three different iterations of the Twilight Zone in one go. So I was really excited about that, and I'm glad I enjoyed the show. I'm glad that I enjoyed each iteration of it. So, all right, so let's get down to business, guys. Let me go ahead and share my thoughts on The Hunt. Now, as is usually the case, I am going to be spoiling The Hunt from the get-go, so if you haven't watched The Hunt, go watch it on Paramount Plus or wherever you watch The Twilight Zone. And yeah, that's your warning. From here on out, I'm going to be spoiling The Hunt. So here we go. I'm going to start with the plot summary, courtesy of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. So here we go with the plot summary for The Hunt. An old man and his hound dog spend the evening hunting for raccoons in the mountains, only to walk home empty-handed. It doesn't take long for him to discover that he and his dog died the night before. Following the well-traveled trail alongside a newly erected fence, he comes to a gate where the gatekeeper welcomes him with open arms, but explains that dogs are not permitted. The hound dog doesn't take a liking to the gatekeeper, so the old man stubbornly decides to continue down the road for a possible solution. A passerby meets up with the old man and explains that the entrance he rejected was the gate to hell. The entrance to heaven isn't paved with gold bricks, but they do allow dogs and raccoon hunting. As the passerby explains, people can enter hell with both eyes open, but once the smell of brimstone is in the air, even the devil cannot fool a dog. Starring in this episode as Hyder Simpson is Arthur Honeycutt. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did appear in one episode of The Outer Limits, Season 2's Cry of Silence. And co-starring as Rachel Simpson is Jeanette Nolan. And this is her first of 2 Twilight Zone appearances. Next we'll see from her is in Season 4's Jess Bell. And she also appeared in 2 episodes of Night Gallery. And I found this interesting. I don't know. So according to IMDb, she has a credit for Psycho as the voice of Norma Bates. Only she's uncredited in the production, so I don't know, but I would assume that she's the voice of Norma Bates then. So that's pretty interesting. Also appearing in this episode is Robert Folk as the gatekeeper. This was his only episode of the Twilight Zone, and he didn't have any other collaborations with Serling or anything. And then rounding out the cast as the Angel is Dexter DuPont. This was also his only Twilight Zone episode. I did find it interesting. Sadly, he passed away, I think, last year. And according to kind of what he, or according to his IMDb, he only acted for like a brief time before leaving in order to obtain steadier work. And so for about 20 years, he sold Cadillacs. And then he went on to become a real estate salesman. So, yeah, but unfortunately he passed away, I think late last year. Writer for this episode, making his first of 8 Twilight Zone writings. His first of 8 Twilight Zone episodes is writer Earl Hamner Jr., which I also believe that this is his first TV writing credit, technically. I say technically because there's something else that I'm going to talk about in trivia. But anyway, the next we'll see from him is here in a few weeks, I think, or in a handful of weeks, we'll see his episode, A Piano in the House. And rounding out the talent for this episode is director Harold Schuster, which this was his only episode of The Twilight Zone that he helmed. And I want to say that this episode in particular was originally slated to be directed by someone else, like a returning director, but I can't remember who it is. I'm kind of thumbing through the Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic right now. Oh yes, it was originally going to be directed by Boris Sagal. So yeah. Anyway. Okay, so that's the talent rundown. Let me go ahead and share my feelings as a first-time viewer, or I'm sorry, what I knew before going into this, before I started the episode for the first time, and then I'll go into my thoughts as a first-time viewer. So what I knew about this episode was nothing. I wasn't sure. I didn't know anything about it. However, I had just recently, like within the last week, listened to an episode of my friend Brandon's podcast, Submitted for Your Approval, a Twilight Zone podcast. And I had listened to his episode about the passersby, and his guest on that episode suggests that the road in the passersby is the same as the hunt. And I kind of intentionally didn't really listen too closely to that part of that podcast because I hadn't watched the hunt yet. So I don't know for certain if he was referring to just the location or if he was implying that there's a supernatural element shared between the road in the passersby and the road in the hunt. Now that I've seen it, I kind of see where he was going with that. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, although I will say that the hunt is fairly similar to the passersby in a few big ways. So anyway, so that was the extent of my knowledge of the hunt before going into it. And as kind of a Hail Mary thing, I kind of wondered if, given the title, The Hunt, I kind of wondered if it was maybe going to be something about like a mob. And that might be because I just recently saw the trailer for the new movie Till, which is coming out in October, I think. And I know that Emmett Till is a big story that Serling found himself writing about quite a bit, or thinking about quite a bit. I know that A Town Has Turned to Dust, I think. I think that's an episode of, I think it was Playhouse 90 that he wrote, that was directly like an allegory for the Emmett Till story. So anyway, so just knowing that history with Serling and his knowledge and the way that he reacted to, or his relationship to the story of Emmett Till, I kind of wondered if that's what this story was going to be. It's not. So yeah. So that's what I knew before going into this episode. So let me go ahead and share my thoughts as a first-time viewer for The Hunt. And I want to say just off the bat that I was very much surprised by how much I kind of adored this episode. I think that there is such a vibrant sweetness to this episode, and I count that completely I count that completely to, or I credit that to Arthur Honeycutt and Jeanette Nolan, as well as Earl Hamner Jr. for writing it. But their chemistry in this opening scene is unbelievable. It is so charming and it is so sweet. So we open on kind of a log cabin exterior shot. We see a man, we're at a distance, he's chopping some wood. We see a dog nearby and we see a bunch of animals kind of next to the house. And as he is gathering the wood, we have this kind of solemn harmonica music that's playing that kind of evokes these ideas of like the Old West, even though I don't think this technically takes place in the Old West. I think it's just rural country America in the modern day at that time. Yeah, it would have to be, I think, because she says 1924 is the last time they were kissed, that she was kissed, and they've been married for almost 50 years. So anyway, yeah, so we learn that her name is Rachel, and he and Rip, the dog, are coming up to bring in the firewood. And Rachel does not want the dog in the house. And I just love the back and forth there. I love the banter. I love how sweet their rapport is. So Hyder says that, that dog saved my life, and he needs to, where he goes, I go, and everything. And then she says, all right, well, I'll let him in here, but I'm not going to talk sweet to him. Just like the banter is just so charming. And I'm just floored by the dialogue between these two old, like this married couple. And so, and also, okay, I'm gonna break a little bit here and say that I have this weird aversion. I don't know how I want to say it. It's probably going to sound prejudiced and everything, but I don't get, rural country culture, like country music and stuff. I can't stand. It's not something that I am taken with or interested in or anything. So I have this weird aversion to that type of culture in American culture. And I don't know, the fact that Hamner went on to make The Waltons makes me curious if I would actually like that show, because again, the dialogue in this scene, in this opening scene, is just so pitch perfect. It is absolutely fantastic. So I don't know. So anyway, so as they get settled into the house, Hyder is kind of hitting on her, asking her when was the last time she was kissed, and she says, "Oh, I think maybe spring of 1924." And then he kisses her, and it's just it is so sweet. It's so sweet, and I love it. I'm so in love with their marriage, their love here. And so they sit down at the table, and I instantly clock it that she keeps referring to him as old man. He refers to her as old woman. It's so endearing, and it's so endearing. And so she says in this great piece of dialogue between the two, we'll learn about their history. She says they've been married for 50 years. Or no. She says that this is so charming. She says they've endured powerful well over the years. And she's like, or he says like, we've been married for almost 50 years. And she says, yep, come October 16th. And then she says, and like, this makes my heart melt. Like it really activates the inner like romantic in me. Because she says, I wouldn't have had it any other way. And then he says, yeah, me neither. And then it's just, again, it's so heartwarming. It's so beautiful. And they're just so sweet together. And what's amazing is that this is basically the only scene they have together. And it's it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. The chemistry, the dialogue, it's just so beautifully realized. And it's instantly demonstrating the point that they are all that they need. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. I fell in love with this episode in that scene alone, which makes the kind of somber nature of the episode all the more sad. And it's something that I kind of struggled with. I was pretty emotional in this episode because this is a big one. This is it's a potentially depressing episode, but because of the strength of the writing and the kind of twists around in the plot, it's a phenomenal episode that is, it is very heartfelt. It's very heartfelt, which I'll get into throughout the review. So anyway, Hyder says that he and Rip are going to go coon hunting after supper, and Rachel is just kind of she's averse to it. She kind of groans a little bit, and she says that she has a bad feeling, that she saw a blood moon the other night, and that a bird came in and sat on Hyder's side of the bed, and it scared her half to death. And and so Hyder isn't bothered by any of this, and she just tells him to be careful, and he says he'll be back before midnight, and that's when we get Rod Serling's opening narration. But I do want to say, before I play the opening narration, that what I really appreciate about the performances here in this scene is that when the scene shifts and Rachel says that she has a bad feeling and she talks about these omens that she has, she's not the kind of tension of the scene or the style of the scene, the tone of the scene doesn't shift entirely. It is shifting to a different tone, that's for sure, and it is kind of having this almost grave energy to it, but there's still that charm between them. It doesn't completely derail it, or it doesn't defy the chemistry that they had before. It just feels like it's coming from a loving and caring place of concern for her. And even when Hyder says, like, yeah, that stuff doesn't concern me or anything, it's not in like any kind of shrill way. It's not in any kind of negative way. It's like, well, yeah, well, that doesn't really bother me or anything, but, I'll be careful. Like, that's the undertone of that, is that I respect your opinion on this, but I'm not going to let a silly superstition, dissuade me from what I want to do. So anyway, let's go into the opening narration from Rod Serling. Here we go.
Now you be careful, old man.
Don't you worry about me, old woman. I'll be back even before midnight, more than likely.
An old man and a hound dog named Rip off for an evening's pleasure in quest of raccoon. Usually these evenings end with one tired old man, one battle-scarred hound dog, and one or more extremely dead raccoons. But as you may suspect, that will not be the case tonight. These hunters won't be coming home from the hill. They're headed for the backwoods of the Twilight Zone.
So right off the bat, after having fallen in love with these characters and falling in love with this story up until this point, as soon as Serling says these hunters won't be coming home from the hill, I'm stealing myself. I'm nervous. I'm nervous, and it's amazing because I'm already just so invested in these characters and I'm so charmed by them that I'm preparing myself for something, that's not going to be easy to swallow for me. And so, yeah. So after we come back from the commercial, I just want to point out, maybe it's because watching it on Paramount Plus, it's a kind of a higher quality stream, maybe, but this is an absolutely gorgeous looking episode. Like the shot of the country, when we see the title card, it is absolutely jaw-droppingly beautiful. And the music that accompanies it is so somber and wistful that it just really, really paints this, literally paints this picture in front of us of a portion of the country that Hyder and Rip and Rachel all live in. It's very engrossing. It's really fantastic. And the amazing cinematography doesn't stop there, because right after that we get Hyder and Rip walking through the woods, and then they find a raccoon, and Rip is chasing it. And this is actually a pretty well done an energetic and almost action-y kind of sequence. Like it's pretty impressive, because Rip is running around, he's chasing the raccoon. The raccoon runs up a tree, Rip kind of corners him there, and then Hyder comes up behind him and says like, "Oh, you got him up a tree. I don't want to discredit your work or anything, but I don't see him. I don't think he's there." But I want to mention that all of this, like the cinematography of this, the nighttime shoot of this sequence, the way that the shadows kind of dance around the woods and dance around the trees and everything is very, very stunning. Like it's one thing to shoot a night scene where you have to kind of struggle to make sense of what's going on. It's a completely different thing to light a night scene in such a way that you can really clearly tell not only where the characters are, what the characters are doing, but you can also tell you can discern the geography and the geography of the scene. And I think that it's just lit incredibly well here. And then we get to the okay, so let me see. Before I get into the stream or the creek or whatever they did, at this point in my first viewing, I thought, like I put down, I'm really curious what the Twilight Zone element will be in this episode. And then I put, God, I hope he isn't going to end up being dead. Like in a similar sense of like The Passersby, or even to a lesser extent, Nothing in the Dark. I was just really nervous that it was going to be another story where he's in the afterlife or what have you. Yeah. And I kind of stand by that. I stand by those reservations that I had, because at this, I didn't understand, or I didn't think, I wasn't conscious of a way that this episode could have done that any differently. And I think that it's a credit to Earl Hamner and to the episode as a whole that I can go into it with those reservations, with those concerns. Like, I hope it's not another character's dead and we need to learn a life lesson, or he needs to, like, he's gonna do this and this is gonna be his journey in the afterlife kind of story. I went into it kind of clocking it as being that kind of story. And then I mean, this is a great episode. Like, this is a phenomenal episode, and it had such an uphill climb from that position that I was putting it in, and it excelled at that. It was fantastic. So anyway, Rip is going crazy. He's running after the raccoon. I keep wanting to pronounce it raccoon, but it's raccoon. Anyway, they chase the raccoon into a stream or creek, or one in the same, whatever. And again, just the filming of the hunting sequence is really solid. Like, in addition, something I forgot to mention about that sequence is that in addition to the shadows and the dusk/moonlight cinematography of it, we also get an abundance of ambient noise in the woods, like the sound of the crickets and the birds and everything. And then we also get, on top of that, we get the kind of pure happiness of Hyder Simpson as he and Rip are in their element. They're running, they're going after the raccoon. Hyder is talking to his buddy. He's talking to Rip. He's talking to him about the hunt and everything. And it is just it's so wonderful. It is very much wonderful. And then Rip jumps into the water, and then we see Hyder taking off his coat, and then he jumps in behind him. And at that point, I'm like, yep, I've got a bad feeling about this. And we get this really, really cool transition scene where the camera is zoomed in on the surface of the water. We see the bubbles go away, and then it switches over to daylight, and we get this stunning frame of the sun with clouds in the reflection of the water. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and then we get the same area, the same situation in daylight. But before that, we get the raccoon comes up and walks away, and in my notes I put murderer. Anyway, so cut to daytime, very nice reflection of the sun. And at that point I'm like, okay, this is confusing to me. Like, what's happening? Because we now see Hyder and Rip just sitting by the stream underneath a tree, and Rip like nuzzles him and wakes him up. And I was like, okay, fine. That's kind of confusing. And then, as soon as Hyder says that, like, yeah, well, you know, Rachel's gonna throw a fit because we were out all night. And I'm like, yeah, they're dead. They're so dead. And then, I put in my notes, I'm going to be bummed out. And I think that subconsciously there was maybe a little bit of hope here that maybe it would turn out that, maybe it'll turn out that Rip is helping Hyder and helping him and like saving his life again, because he apparently saved his life at some point else, judging from the first scene, which we never really get any closure on, or we never get any context for, which is a shame. I kind of wish that we had something about that, but I guess it doesn't really matter because the overall kind of impression is that, you know, he and Rip are very close. So anyway, so they get up and, I was kind of holding out hope that it would be a thing where Rip is saving his life. So I don't know, but unfortunately that's not the case because they're both dead. And we also don't get much information as into how they died or why they died. Presumably they both drowned, which is good enough for me, but I kind of wish that there was a little bit more there. So, So on the way home, Hyder reaches his land and sees the two Miller boys digging a grave, and they're talking, and one of them says, like, yeah, I think that's deep enough. That's, 3 feet. He's like, no, he says that's deep enough for a dog. And then the other guy says, yeah, well, according to Old Man Simpson, Rip was no ordinary dog. And then they have this whole back and forth about it where Hyder is listening to him or listening to them and trying to intervene or trying to interrupt them, but they do not hear him or see him because he and Rip are ghosts. So yeah, and what I really liked about this scene is that Hyder has this agitation in him, but he also, once he realizes that they're talking about a dead dog, he's like, oh, I understand that, I respect that, go on. But also a couple of things, I'm kind of jumping around on this scene a little bit, but I do find it interesting and kind of messed up that one of the Miller kids is just sitting on Rip's coffin. Like, he's sitting on this box, and then they're arguing over digging the grave. And then when they get it dug, they're like, all right, let's put him in. And the box that he's sitting on is Rip's coffin. And I'm like, come on, man. That's a little, I don't like that. So at this point, I'm like, before that even, I'm like, okay, so Rip and the old man are ghosts then, right? And I thought it was kind of curious that one of the Miller guys he says that I felt like he referred to Hyder Simpson in the present tense, because he says that not the way that Old Man Simpson talks about Rip. So that for a brief moment made me think that maybe he wasn't dead and just that Rip was. Either way, I didn't like it. I didn't like those feelings that it was emitting for me. But then almost as soon as I have that thought, the other Miller guy says, it'll be awful lonesome out here without Old Man Simpson. So that confirms that he's dead. And then so Hyder calls to them. They can't hear him or see them. That's when he gets agitated. And this... In this moment, it kind of got me a little bit. It's a little heartbreaking to me because in this moment, it's this level of surrealness that, fortunately for Hyder Simpson, he's not picking up what they're putting down. He's not realizing that he's a ghost and that he's watching them bury his dog. Because I feel like the pain of him watching and realizing that his dog is dead and watching them bury it would be a little too somber for me. So in effect, he just doesn't recognize it, that's what's going on. So as they're burying the coffin, or as they're putting the coffin in the grave, one of them says, "It's just a dog." And the other one says, "Not to some folk." And that's like the main point of the episode. And I love this episode for that. And I find it really interesting because the episode begins with us really falling in love with this married couple. And then by this point, like it is more about the relationship of a man and his dog, and the love and reverence and seriousness that bond has is just incredibly well realized in this episode. And it's kind of punctuated in this scene by the Millers. After they have put the coffin in the ground, they take their hats off as a show of respect for Rip. And I really love that. I really love that. So then Rip and Hyder head home to Rachel to discover, to get their, I don't know, I don't know, in their mind, to get their punishment for staying out all night. And in the almost immediate, there's an immediate situation that comes up when they go into the house, because Rachel is clearly, she's dressed all in black, kind of in a widow's attire, and she isn't responding to Hyder when he talks to her, and he thinks it's because she's mad that he was out all night, which I appreciate that, and I think that's good storytelling, and there's even a hint of that just fun banter that he has there with her, well, like as a ghost has with her, basically. And there's a hint of that fun banter where he said, what does he say? He says, if you're fixing to leave me because I stayed out all night, I'm going to have to disagree with you, or something like that. Very playful and sweet. So he still doesn't understand that he's dead. And that alone is very sad and makes me sad. And so she says to the preacher or the priest or whoever, I think, she says that it was just last night that she warned him not to go. And he just is still in denial. He thinks that there's been a misunderstanding, and that he's, everything's going to work itself out. Then the men come in to take the body to the grave, which everything is moving so fast in terms of what's going on. Like, in fact, the first time I watched it, I thought that she had said just last month that she warned him not to go, which, like, I didn't even think about that in terms of like, oh yeah, the bodies are going to be decomposing and everything in a month. But anyway, it was just last night. So that also kind of makes me think maybe part of it is that maybe it is set kind of decently in the past, or a while in the past, maybe in the 20s, because there's very quick movement for that, I guess, or maybe because they live in such a remote location. I'm not sure. But anyway, the men come in to take the body to the grave, and then Hyder tries to comfort Rachel by saying that, like, at this point he realizes like something's amiss, but he's still in denial. He says that it's just a dream. It's okay. It's just a dream. And in my notes here, I put, man, I really hope so, because I was just still so affected by this episode. So there's this surreal quality to him seeing them, like watching them take his coffin out of the house. And I just love that, how he's trying in vain to get them to respond to him, and talking about like, oh, what do you got in the box? Like, what's in the box? Like, what's going on? There's been a big misunderstanding, all on deaf ears, and that's just so. It's beautifully accompanied by some. I think it's like I don't know, string music, but the cut to commercial is pretty pivotal because it is just a zoom in on Hyder's face as he's slowly realizing that something is wrong, but he just doesn't want to admit it yet. And so at this point, again, to reiterate, I feel like this is so far a very heartfelt and profound episode, and I love it for that. I already love it for that. And I put in my notes also that I really hope that it ends with a new lease on life kind of thing and not with him and Rip really dead. Like, I really hope that it was really a dream because I was still kind of holding out hope there. But anyway, so he leaves the house and he says, we're going to get to the bottom of this. The graveyard is just over yonder and we're going to go. And so at that point, I still like that he's still talking to Rip. Like, he's talking to Rip as if he is, his companion and everything, which he is. And I love that. I love that. As someone who loves, animals, and I love my cat, I just really appreciate that. Like, the kind of animal companion, the domesticated animal companion aspect of it is really, really fantastic. So, yeah, so it's great. So Hyder and Rip come across a new fence, and they're still not catching on to things at that point. And I wasn't either, because my first time watching this is kind of embarrassing, but the first time watching this episode, when he comes across the new fence, he says, man, I don't remember anyone building the fence here. Like, what's going on? At that point, I was still thinking that Rachel had said it was just last month that she told him not to go hunting. So I thought that there was like a significant time jump with it and everything. So I was like, yeah, a fence was built because a month has passed, and fences get built. But that's not the case. They were a fence for the afterlife. So anyway, he and Rip walk along the fence and they find the gate, and with a booth, and the man in the booth can see them. And immediately, I put in my notes, this man is like St. Peter. This is the pearly gates of heaven. And I've got to say, I am so impressed by how much I fell for this. I bought this right from the get-go. I did not see anything nefarious or anything underhanded. I did not see the twist coming at all. And I think that is definitely a credit to Earl Hamner Jr.'s writing, because the performances, really, because I just bought it hook, line, and sinker. So as the gatekeeper is taking his notes and everything, he says, I need to know one more thing, Neighbor Simpson. How'd you die? Because you wouldn't be here if you weren't dead. And I just love that as this existential moment and everything. It's great. And I love how expected it is too, because we as the audience are expecting it at this point. And then I like the way that the gatekeeper coaxes him or coerces him into explaining it, or he kind of nudges him along like, well, okay, tell me what you did last night. Tell me what happened. And then Hyder is starting to explain it, and then he realizes there's a gap, and that's when he died. And so then he asks, what's on the other side of that gate there? And the gatekeeper says, that pasture up there is the Elysian Field. Past that, they call it the Golden Street. And that takes you right into Celestial Palace, where the old master has his headquarters. And I really like that. I like that level of detail. Being someone who's not religious really at all, I'm not a religious person. I don't follow religion or anything. I wonder if that's biblical references or if that's just something colorful to put in the show. I'm not sure. But anyway, in addition to that dialogue, I really like how the gatekeeper keeps referring to Simpson as Neighbor Simpson. it's friendly enough without being personable or personal. He's not calling him like, oh, Brother Simpson or anything. And I think that that's a little bit of a hint toward the sinister kind of thing underneath. But yeah, so I don't know. But I really liked how friendly they were with each other. And that goes to show how personable Hyder Simpson is as a character. I think he's fantastic. So then at this point, I'm thinking like, okay, well, where's the conflict? What's the conflict of this episode here? And then we get the wrinkle in it where, I even put in my notes, St. Peter says he can't take Rip with him. He's not St. Peter, Matt. He's not. So he tells him like, oh no, I'm sorry that Rip can't go in there with you. This is folk heaven, dog heaven is down the road a ways. And I really like how that's a nice reversal of that first scene with Rachel and Hyder, because there's that resistance that, Hyder's not allowed, or I'm sorry, Rip isn't allowed in the house or anything, but, because of the connection that Hyder has with Rip, he's able to give Rip a pass into the house and everything. Here, not so much, for reasons that we'll learn later at the end of the episode. But, yeah, so, this is where the episode just really, got right back to my heartstrings and pulled them so beautifully. Because at that moment, it's clear that Hyder isn't going to go to heaven because Rip isn't allowed. And I thought that was such a beautiful sentiment. And I was so, on repeat viewings, I was so impressed how much I just bought into this entirely. But yeah, I thought that that's such a beautiful idea, which I'll talk about here in a second, but I thought that was just really beautiful. So the gatekeeper says that Simpson, that Hyder isn't going to be let into dog heaven or anything. And so Hyder's like, well, what kind of raccoon hunting is there in heaven if I can't have Rip? And he's like, oh, we don't allow raccoon hunting in heaven. What? Like, no, that's been outlawed and everything. And so at that moment, Hyder chooses to not go, in his perspective, not go to heaven, and instead chooses, in that moment, again, he chooses to be with Rip for all of eternity, going down Eternity Road, which in my mind is like a never-ending limbo, never-ending road, and that's where I thought that the episode was heading. But also, that's, again, just the sentiment of that is so strikingly beautiful. The idea that this man would rather spend eternity with his dog instead of going to heaven is, like, I'm getting a little choked up. I'm getting a little teary-eyed just thinking about it, because it is pure love, that bond between them. It is absolutely beautiful. I love it so much. So then he kind of sits Rip down and he's talking to him, and he's saying that he supposes that heaven is full of city folk because only city folk would outlaw coon hunting, and that's not a place that I want to be. So the comforting nature of that is just really beautiful to me. And then we see someone approaching, and it's a man who was looking for them. And I have a bunch of exclamation points in my notes. Whoa, ha 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 ha. That wasn't St. Peter. He was trying to lure him into hell. And like, oh my God, it's just so awesome. That moment is so amazing when the angel speaks to Hyder, and he has that kind of like, oh golly, like very, very genuine, like country boy kind of persona to him. Like he's very much, he's like tickled, and he's humbled and modest and everything. Like, oh no, I'm an angel, and oh no, like he's like, well, where are your wings? And it's like, oh, I don't need my wings. I prefer walking anyway. I barely use my wings. It's very like an oh shucks kind of thing. I love it so much. And he says like, oh yeah, dogs are allowed in heaven. Like, what are you talking about? That's not like, that's a thing. Of course dogs are allowed in heaven. And like, I put in my notes, this is awesome. I'm so happy because it is such a confirmation of what the show is demonstrating. The show is demonstrating the bond between a man and his dog. And to get that confirmation in the episode that yes, heaven is for dogs, like, of course, yeah, they're not going to be separated. It's so beautiful. It is so beautiful, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. So then the angel says, you like, that's hell over there. Like they try to get everyone in the last minute. Heaven's actually up yonder a piece. And then he says, Hyder asks him why he wasn't going to let Rip in. And he says, well, a man can walk right into hell with his eyes wide open. He can see everything, but even the devil can't fool a dog. And I'm like, that is so beautiful. That's such a great way to kind of end the episode on, except we get Hyder's entrance into heaven. He asks about Rachel. And he's told by the angel that Rachel will be following close behind. And so that kind of relieves Hyder a bit. And so he walks into heaven with Rip, and it's a beautiful ending. It's absolutely beautiful. I loved this episode, you guys. And I'm going to play the closing narration from Serling right now.
Come along, Rip.
Travelers to unknown regions would be well advised to take along the family dog. He could just save you from entering the wrong gate. At least it happened that way once, in a mountainous area of the Twilight Zone.
So, overall thoughts, this was a phenomenal episode in my opinion. It was a very emotional ride for me, and I was very impressed. As someone who isn't like even a religious person, I'm not religious. I'll just say that. So anytime the afterlife, or specifically like a religious kind of read of the afterlife is depicted in media, I'm sometimes I may not be able to really connect with it, but I find myself finding it very, very satisfying in a lot of cases, actually. Like, I really liked The Passersby for that reason. Lost, the finale of Lost is one of my favorite things on television ever that I've ever seen. And it deals with that too. So to have this episode be less about the drama of the man dying and more about the connection with his dog and with his wife as well is really, really satisfying to me. And the fact that this episode made me hope that Hyder wasn't really dead, specifically for Rachel and his sake. Given that was my main concern after the beginning of the episode, the fact that this episode was able to allow me to accept it by putting Rip's eternal life in jeopardy, it is just some really, really good storytelling, in my opinion. I think that this is phenomenal. And Hamner just knocked it out of the park. Like, that was fantastic. I'm so excited to see more of his work and everything. Also, the final note about this episode, and I've got to point it out, I love that the dog's name is Rip, because the story is about a dead man and his dead dog, Rip. I love that. So anyway, so those are my thoughts on The Hunt. And I am actually gonna share a little bit of trivia. Really, I just have Yeah, I just have one piece of trivia. Two pieces of trivia, but the writer of this episode, Earl Hamner Jr., would go on to create the long-running drama The Waltons, and the way that Hyder and Rachel address each other as old man and old woman is a precursor to the, quote, cantankerous banter between Grandpa and Grandma Walton, who also addressed each other as such. And also, apparently, the cabin in the show is the same one that the Beverly Hillbillies lived in, on TV. And then the final piece of trivia, this is pretty neat. The plot of this episode is actually based on a 1953 episode of the Kate Smith Hour called The Hound of Heaven, which was written by Earl Hamner Jr. Now, again, this came out in 1953. This episode of The Twilight Zone was 1962. And that episode of the Kate Smith Hour aired on January 15th, 1953. And I kind of just assumed, like, oh, okay, he wrote something, and then, you know, the plot is based on that. The plot of this episode of The Twilight Zone is based on that. But fortunately, this episode of the Kate Smith Hour is available on YouTube, and I watched it, and no, this episode of The Twilight Zone, like, this is a direct adaptation of The Hound of Heaven. And I am so glad that the episode exists on YouTube, because, I mean, it's only 12 minutes, and the specific reason that it's on YouTube is because James Dean plays the angel. And not only that, but future Twilight Zone alums, Edgar Stolley, who played Professor Kittredge in Long Live Walter Jameson, he plays the gatekeeper, and John Carradine plays Hyder Simpson, who was John Carradine was of course Brother Jerome in The Howling Man, and also he was in one episode of the 80s Twilight Zone and in one episode of Night Gallery. But it's very straightforward. It's basically the exact plot, but without Rachel. It is basically a very condensed section, or a condensed version of the story, without the spouse, and almost exact dialogue. In fact, I have a couple of audio clips that I'm going to kind of play here, or definitely play here, really, to kind of demonstrate it. The first one, I believe, has Edgar Stolley talking to John Carradine, to kind of demonstrate how it's basically the exact same dialogue that was used for the Twilight Zone episode. So I'm going to go ahead and play that clip here.
Hey, what's the other side of that fence, anyhow?
Well, that pasture right up there, they call that the Elysian Fields. You follow that a piece and you come to the Golden Street, and that take you right to the Celestial Palace, where the big boss got his headquarters.
Oh, I take it then your name's Peter.
Well, I keep the gate, that's a fact.
I'm proud to make you acquaintance.
Just as proud to have you here. Well, don't stand out there in the cold world. Come on in and reap your heavenly reward.
So that was Edgar Stolley playing the gatekeeper, and John Carradine playing Hyder Simpson. Same name and everything, too. Almost the exact same dialogue. Really pretty cool. And then I do have a clip of James Dean playing the angel, just because I think that's so interesting. Like, I just recently, within the last year, I've watched really my only James Dean performance, Rebel Without a Cause, for Obsessive Viewer. And I mean, he was incredible, absolutely incredible. So here's a clip of James Dean playing the angel in The Hound of Heaven.
How come you want to keep Rip out?
See, he was afeard that Rip would have warned you. And he would have, too, once he got a whiff of that brimstone. You see, Mr. Simpson, a man, he walked right into hell with both eyes open. But not even the devil can fool a dog.
Oh.
So I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted to share that here. I will put, of course, the link to that episode of the Kate Smith Hour in the show notes of the episode. Feel free to, click on it and watch it. I do recommend it. It's pretty good. It's pretty interesting to see it. And in the trivia section of IMDb for this, I read that this is a direct quote from that. In his interview with the Archive of American Television, Hamner discusses writing relatively brief dramatic pieces for the Kate Smith Hour, including The Hound of Heaven. It also became the basis for his first film television credit, The Hunt on the Twilight Zone. Hamner said he much preferred John Carradine's portrayal on Kate Smith to Arthur Honeycutt's in the same role on The Twilight Zone, which I respectfully disagree. They're very close to one another, though. The performances are very close to one another. So I kind of wonder if Honeycutt kind of, used John Carradine's performance as a starting point, or as an influence on that. I'm not sure, because I doubt that he had access to it, really. But anyway, I just found that to be pretty interesting, and yeah, so it's interesting also that James Dean has a loose connection to the Twilight Zone. So that's interesting. Which, by the way, James Dean never appeared on the Twilight Zone. However, he was in one episode of Tales of Tomorrow. So, I think that's it for my review of The Hunt. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode of The Twilight Zone, because this is one of those ones that it really affected me. It really hit home with me, and I love it. I really, really love it. And I don't know where it stands in terms of the greater Twilight Zone fandom and everything, but I'd be very curious to hear what people think of this episode. If you can, just send me a tweet or Facebook, whatever, facebook.com/anthologypod, and on Twitter @OVAnthologypod, or just email me, matt@obsessiveviewer.com. So do all that and everything. So, all right, well, now that I have concluded my review of The Hunt, I'm going to go ahead and round us out with a review of an episode of Science Fiction Theater, and I'm going to play the jingle for that right now. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about Target Hurricane, which is Season 1, Episode 26 of Science Fiction Theater. It is available online. As you guys should know by now, the DVD set is out of print, but Target Hurricane is available online. I have a link in the show notes to where you can watch it. It originally aired on October 22nd, 1955, which means we're getting closer. We're getting closer to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. I'll just say that. This episode plot synopsis, courtesy of IMDb, is the Miami Hurricane Bureau leaps into action when a killer storm mysteriously appears offshore. Besides keeping the public informed of the threat, James Tyler is worried about his son, who's on a camping trip with his Boy Scout troop. This episode was directed by Lee Jason and written by Robert Schaefer and Eric Freewald, with a story by credit from Ivan Tors. And it stars Marshall Thompson, Ray Collins, and Margaret Field. So, as is normally the case with science fiction theater, it begins with a pre-show demonstration by Truman Bradley. He is kind of demonstrating how hurricanes are formed and how scientists can observe weather patterns and how weather patterns are formed and how hurricanes are formed and everything. He showcases, I guess they're weather balloons and everything, which, in my head, I just kind of thought that was kind of neat, because it's weather balloons are often the excuse for aliens or for UFOs and everything. So I just thought that was kind of funny. So he ends the demonstration on a note where he says something like, "Science believes the day will come when we can control the weather." And I thought that was just kind of charming. And so the episode itself does the same thing that science fiction theater does or has been doing, these past 26 episodes. It's doing a lot of science and a lot of science-based stuff with what I would assume are fairly limited resources in terms of budget and production value. This episode is pretty impressive in that regard because it's all about weather phenomenon, and it's about this uncharacteristic hurricane pattern that is very much on its way to potentially destroying Miami, Florida, or at least destroying the main character's son's camping trip. So what the episode kind of has as a big kind of obstacle in its way is the fact that it's trying to, it has to demonstrate the urgency of it and the power of it mostly through dialogue, because they can't cut away to like big production things. They do show some pretty cool B-roll footage or I think archive footage, what have you, of like a submarine and a plane, and to get the readings of the hurricane and everything, because basically they find out that there is a hurricane that is hours away from hitting Florida. And that it just kind of snuck up on them. It came up out of nowhere. The rotary speed of the hurricane is 200 miles per hour when the fastest rotary speed on record for a hurricane at that point is 90 miles per hour. And there is some weird explosion that happened out at sea. And it's just very confusing and strange. And again, I think it's pretty impressive and interesting how they were handling the weather phenomenon of it without much of a budget, because a lot of it is in that energy of the performances of the characters reacting to this news and reacting to these things. And it's really, it does a good job of heightening the tension and making it pretty intense. With very little and everything. And I mean, we have like, it's the same set that they've been using, but it's the, what is it called? The U.S. Weather Bureau Hurricane Warning Center. And so they have a lot of like maps and charts and stuff. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And that urgency is really, really fantastic. And so the thing that I really latched onto in this first half of this episode of Science Fiction Theater is I got such a good like Godzilla vibe out of it. And I really like that because I really like Godzilla, but it just has that energy to it. This mysterious explosion in the ocean that caused this massive hurricane that's threatening human life and everything. Like, it's pretty cool. It's pretty neat. And it's pretty interesting that this, I don't know if that had any influence on it, because I know Godzilla came out a year before this episode aired. So I don't know if I don't know how much of a cultural phenomenon Godzilla was in the States at that time, because I think that Godzilla King of the Monsters, I think that's what it's called, the one with Raymond Burr, that basically repurposes the footage of Godzilla into like just puts this random like American journalist, and he's reacting to it's honest, it's cute. It's very cute. It's frustrating, but it's cute. The original Godzilla is amazing. It's one of my favorites. But that kind of American bastardization is really, it's pretty funny. So anyway, I think that came out in 1956. So I don't know. It probably was a big cultural hit over here by the time this episode was airing in 55. But anyway, so they're talking, and they have to break into television to issue the hurricane warning because it came up so suddenly and everything. And I do want to mention, as a microphone nerd that I am, an audio equipment nerd, I did really like seeing and I think I've pointed this out before, I'm sure, but I really liked seeing the vintage but new then Shure Unidyne 55, I think, microphone, which is the iconic like Elvis mic, that they don't even use in this episode. They use the other mic when they're talking to the submarine and to the Air Force and everything, but it looks gorgeous. Anyway, so they break into television to issue the hurricane warning, while James is giving this warning over the air, while he's also worried about his son who's on a camping trip. Won't give anything away, but the energy of it is pretty entertaining. It's pretty good, and the resolution of a lot of the I don't know, guys. So the resolution is kind of, it's interesting to me. I was very curious how they were going to explain away the explosion aspect of it. I was very curious how the explosion was going to be addressed, because that is a very interesting element, that this idea of an explosion at sea causing a hurricane to suddenly crop up. I did not know how they were going to do that. I had no idea. So the way that they do it is very science fiction-y. It's very much, it kind of feels like, oh, well, we're going to explain it away this way so that the audience doesn't think that it's actually a possibility that this massive hurricane can crop up in the middle of nowhere immediately and be a threat at this point. But I don't know, the explanation, I'm not going to give it away, but it's just I kind of rolled my eyes with it a little bit, or at it a little bit, but it was still entertaining, and the resolution of the son's camping trip is pretty humorous too. It's pretty satisfying, I'll say that. So overall, it's a pretty solid episode of science fiction theater. It does kind of leave on that note of, someday we'll be able to conquer weather and everything, which very optimistic, you guys. That's great. Now, honestly, some of this episode really made me think of really my childhood. Like in elementary school, I was very much into tornadoes. I was very interested in tornadoes. Like when Jan de Bont's movie Twister came out, like my mom took me to see it in the theater, and like I loved it I loved tornadoes. In this episode of Science Fiction Theater really makes me think of movies like Twister, like not necessarily I guess disaster movies. That whole umbrella can be kind of assigned to this feeling that I'm having, but in particular Twister, because in Twister they had these things, these little like pods that they were trying to throw into the Twister to get readings and everything, so that they could better predict when a when a tornado will be there. And the energy of that really feels like it reminded me of that energy when I was watching this episode of Science Fiction Theater, because it is about learning about weather. It is learning about containing Mother Nature in a way. And I don't know. I really felt a strong twinge of nostalgia and kind of comfort with it. I really liked it. It's also fitting because right before I hit record, it was storming here in Indianapolis. Not severely or anything, but it was enough to light up my apartment, and I kind of enjoyed that. So anyway, so I also really liked in this episode the transparency that the Hurricane Warning Center had with the viewing public. Like, they break into the news, or they break into the television frequently, like a couple of times in the episode, and they go so far as to give detailed analysis of what the hurricane's doing and what they're doing to get the data that they need to determine when the hurricane is gonna hit land. And it's really cool because it's doing double duty. It is showing that, science wins, science is great, all that. I love that. But it's also showing how it's showing how they can kind of cut around the budget a little bit, or they can kind of they can kind of work around the budget is really the word I'm looking for. The phrase I'm looking for is they can work around the budget because they have like a whole scene where they're sending a plane to penetrate the hurricane to get readings of it, while also sending a submarine to the point of the explosion that caused the hurricane. And so they have equipped the plane with film cameras, and they're basically process the film and are showing it to the audience and everything. And I mean, I think it's probably just stock footage of aircraft and everything. And I think that they may have overlaid some like cloud effects on it to make it a little bit more cloudy, which is fine. I'm not going to dog it for that or anything. But the thing that I love about it is that James Tyler, the main character who works for the Hurricane Warning Center, he is the one that's addressing the public in the breakthrough of the show and everything, and on the news. And also he's clearly at Truman Bradley's desk in the opening segments and everything, but with like a little like Doppler reading thing or something behind him, which I found that to be pretty charming. But anyway, as they're showing the footage, he's like, now I'm going to narrate. I'm going to explain to you what you're seeing and everything. And it kind of harkens back to like radio shows and everything, because he's like, now the wind is going very hard and they're getting a readout of 200 miles per hour, the rotary thing, and now we're in the ominous eye of the hurricane, and the water in the sea is boiling or something like that, is containing the danger of the hurricane. It's really, really funny and charming, and kind of, I don't know, it very much harkens back to like radio broadcasts and radio plays and everything. So I don't know, I liked it. It was a charming episode. Yeah, I enjoyed it. So that's Target Hurricane. Again, it's available online on dailymotion.com. There is also a YouTube link somewhere out there. I've been burned with YouTube links with science fiction theater because I think there might be like copyright notice somewhere out there. So if you find it on YouTube, watch it immediately because it might not be there tomorrow. So, so that is it for this week's episode of Anthology. I want to thank you guys so much for listening to me, as I do all the time. I just really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys enjoyed my thoughts on the Hunt and Target Hurricane. And once again, I just want to put my spiel out there and say that if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I have a ton of bonus content on there, and it really helps to keep the lights on and keep me motivated to do more things. And I like I said, I have a ton of stuff on there that's not just like science fiction related. It is all movies and TV and book and stuff. So I've been doing Stephen King short fiction reviews. I've been doing TV episode reviews of Severance. I've been doing commentary tracks for movies that are on my top 25 favorite movies list. And I've often do these Patreon potpourri, or maybe often, but Patreon potpourri segments and everything, and also B-roll recordings of me just kind of warming up for recording with my co-hosts and guests. So, all right, that's my spiel. I want to thank you guys once again for listening to episode 83 of Anthology. Next time on the show, I'm going to be covering the Twilight Zone Season 3, Episode 20, Showdown with Rance McGrew, and I will also be covering The Watermaker from Science Fiction Theater Season 1. I'm going to start playing myself out. And The Watermaker is available on YouTube, so find that, and I will be back next week. Once again, check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Also check out my other shows, Obsessive Viewer and Tower Junkies. I feel like we're putting a lot of good content out there this year. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. And now, enjoy this short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. For the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, such as early access to episodes, TV, book, and movie reviews and reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and Patreon potpourri episodes, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. Possibility. We see Mark watching the news, and on the news they're talking like it's they're talking about a case where a woman became pregnant a month into working at a company where she was severed a month and a half, I think. And I just find that like little detail here and there scattered throughout the series, like that in the it's the whole mind collective kind of idea. That's really interesting to me. Like, I just love that kind of detail, that detail to the society as a whole. So I think that that's a really good way to world build and kind of really bring us into this concept and everything. So
this podcast was edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find links to all of our shows at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcasts. For exclusive bonus content, including reviews, commentaries, and B-roll episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.